Hey guys, this is Geethanjali. In the previous video, we learned about adaptive radiation, and in this video, we'll be learning about the different theories of evolution. So, one of the most famous theories of evolution was given by Charles Darwin, his Darwinian theory of evolution. So, it was mainly based on natural selection. So, we know what natural selection is, right? So, let us take an example. Let us take we have a colony of bacteria of the same species. Now let us divide this colony into colony A and colony B. And now let us introduce an antibiotic in colony A, and let us keep the same medium in colony B. Now after a few days, you will notice that in this colony A, this colony B, this colony A has become resistant to this antibiotic. Now, how did this happen? So, before we had only one single species of bacteria over here, but because of the built-in variations, there are actually two groups of bacteria here which we are not able to differentiate. One group of bacteria is resistant to the antibiotic and another group is not resistant. So we only found out that there were two different kinds of bacteria only when we changed the environment and we introduced an antibiotic over here. Here we did not use, it was the same, right? But here we changed the medium. And when we changed the medium, eventually all the bacteria that were not resistant to this antibiotic were wiped out, and now only those bacteria are present which are resistant, and only those will again reproduce and continue. And thus, we have a different kind of, you can say, species from this. Because in this, we have both kinds of bacteria which are resistant and non-resistant, but we could not differentiate them until we introduced a change that is in the medium. So the same thing was in the case of the peppered mouth during industrialization. Until there was a change in the environment, we could not make or definitely differentiate or put those two categories under separate species until there was a change in the environment. Because when the change in the environment happens, the nature naturally selects the better individuals of the population. Darwin adopted two main key concepts in his theory, that is the branching descent and natural selection. So what is branching descent? Branching descent means that there was a species and this species gave rise to different kind of species due to the changes in the environment and its inbuilt variations. So we can see this species branches off or gets evolved into different kinds, and again these may give rise to different kinds. So you can see there is a branching and it descends. So that is why it is called branching descent. Darwin was actually inspired by the work of Thomas Malthus on population and limited resources. So he incorporated those points too in his theory. So his theory mainly had these key points. So first is that any population has inbuilt variations, and these inbuilt variations, they are small and they are inheritable. That means they can pass on to the next generation. And nature always has limited resources, and it can hold a fixed number in the population. And because of this limited resources, there is a cutthroat competition between the various species. And whichever species has those inheritable variations that favor them in their environment, they survive and they are able to leave their progeny. Again, this can be in a large number because reproductive fitness is ultimately the only fitness Darwin was talking about. So, more the progeny it leaves, the better it is for its species to move on in the evolutionary ladder. So again, when it leaves so many species, so many progenies, then there might be overpopulation. So again, when there is overpopulation, the resources become more limited, right? And when it becomes more limited, again there is more competition between the progenies itself. Again, whichever progeny has that inbuilt favorable variation will again survive. So you can see this is kind of a cycle that keeps happening, and this gradually leads to evolution of different kinds of species. Before Darwin, there was another person, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, who also came up with his own theory of evolution. So let us understand his theory by comparing it to Darwin's theory. So Darwin's main basis was the branching descent and natural selection, whereas Lamarck thought that there was some internal vital force in all organisms that helped them in evolving. So how is that? So this internal vital force, it helped the organisms to acquire characters which were useful for them. Let us take the example of giraffes. Okay, so in those days, there were giraffes apparently with small neck. Okay, but when the grass on the land was nearly absent, they had to move on to leaves that are present on the trees. So to consume them, they had to stretch their neck. They had to stretch their neck and reach out to these leaves. So this internal vital force, they help the giraffes to get longer necks, okay, during the course of time. Okay, as the giraffe stretches its neck becomes longer, right? Whenever we stretch something for a long period of time, for many days, it you will notice that it becomes elongated. So same case with the neck of the giraffe, so it becomes elongated. And this character that it has acquired during its lifetime, it passes on to its progenies too. So these progenies again, they stretch out their neck and again it becomes longer. So like that, eventually giraffes got very long neck. So that is what Lamarck actually proposed. So you can see here, Darwin did not have any concept of any internal force, whereas he did not have concept of natural selection, but he had this concept that the vital force helped them acquire the new character. Not only the vital force, but the change in the environment too helped them acquire a better character. And here, this main point, here he proposed that only useful variations will be transferred over successive generations, because the one having useless variations will not be able to reproduce and give more progeny, so they will eventually be wiped out. But this was not the case that Lamarck proposed. He basically told this acquired character will be transferred to its progeny too. But this is not the case. This is actually false. Let us say a man is there. Before he was very lean, okay, and then he ate a lot of good food like proteins, and he exercised, and then he became very muscular and strong. Now let us say this man marries and gives babies. Now can you tell that these babies will be strong or lean? So we cannot say that, right? We cannot say that the babies will grow up to be lean or strong, because this depends on their kind of appetite and activities, and these cannot be transferred to their progenies, because these such characters will not be inherited in the progenies. Only the characters that are coded in our DNA, in our genes, will pass on to the progenies. So that is why Lamarck's theory was quite infamous, whereas Darwin's theory was much accepted at those times. Now, moving on to another theory, that is the mutation theory of evolution, that was proposed by Hugo de Vries as he worked on Evening Primrose. Let us also understand his theory by comparing it to Darwin's theory of evolution. So Darwin's was based on natural selection, but Hugo de Vries based it on mutation mainly. He thought that mutation was the main driving force for evolution. Darwin thought that the variations were quite small and they were directional. But Davis argued that these variations, basically the mutations, are completely random, directionless, and they are large too. So that is why he called this saltation, because the mutations were quite large and they took place in a single step and not gradually. So here you have the fourth point. He thought that evolution was gradual and a very slow process, but no. Davis thought that these mutations, which are directionless and very large, that is why they could cause sudden change in the phenotype and thus give rise to a completely new species, and thus a new organism has evolved. So Darwin believed that these minor variations gradually accumulated and gave rise to new species, thus causing evolution. But De Vries did not think so. He thought that these mutations, which were aimless and very large, caused evolution suddenly and not over a period of time. So, hope this comparison helped you to understand Hugo de Vries' point of view of evolution. So, these were the three different theories of evolution.